Hi there. So yes, I'm Julia Payne. I'm director of the Hub. Welcome to today's Balance Talk, the third in our series, which is all about how to balance your mind in order to balance your books. A little bit about the Hub. So we're a creative sector social enterprise, and we do a couple of things. We do sort of all the usual research and consultancy stuff that you would find a consultancy practice doing. But we also have a social enterprise approach. So we take the proceeds that we make from all of the research and consultancy and plough those into projects of our own that we want to make happen, that we think are important. And those are projects like this and a few of the other things that we've got going on at the moment. We've got a really strong focus on independence and innovation. And so when COVID-19 hit, we thought it would be really good to try and do some to run these talks just to help people to think a little bit about their mental health as well as about what they were going to do with their businesses and their careers. I want to just introduce Andy, if you can give us a wave there. Andy Gibson, my co-host for today. Hello, Andy. Andy is head gardener at a brilliant organisation called Mind Apples. And he works with hundreds of businesses each year to support people in their teams to take better care of their minds, and hopefully he's going to give us some tips on how we can all do that today. So the Balance series, this is the third talk, as I mentioned. The previous two that we did are both available on the Hub's YouTube channel. So if you go to the website, you'll find a link to those there. The first was all about why it's important to balance your mind if you want to balance your books. And the second was all about dealing with anxiety and uncertainty and overwhelm. We're really grateful to have some brilliant funders and supporters for the programme. So originally this series was going to be done in the real world. I don't know if we still call the real world, but it wasn't going to be done online. And it had been funded by Colchester Borough Council and South East Creatives, who operate locally to where I'm based. But when the pandemic hit, they said, of course, yeah, take it online and make it available to everyone. And of course, we've been working with the Creative Industries Federation as a partner on this project, who've been brilliant too. Just a little bit about today's talk then. As Abby said, it is sorting the shoulds from the coulds, how to stay motivated and make the right choices. And we're going to be looking at a few things really. First of all, how you can identify what matters in all the noise that's around at the moment, how you can find a path that gives you energy and motivation, and finally how you can plan in a really good way during all the chaos that's ensuing. And I do a fair amount of business planning training with people, and often when I talk about it, I discourage people from using the term business planning, and we talk about inventing your future instead, because I think that for creatives, business planning is as much about what makes your heart sing as it is about what makes the bottom line balance. And that's because I think probably for most people here, we're very values driven in terms of what we do and what as a career. And I don't know about you, but certainly planning, when I plan, it gives me purpose, and then that purpose renews the energy that I have for what I do. So we're going to be looking at a little bit of that today. But the challenge, of course, is that it's really hard to plan at the moment with everything feeling as uncertain as it does. So we're going to be trying to find that kind of happy balance between kind of having enough planned to make you feel a little bit more certain, but still leaving kind of yourself open enough to be able to take advantage of some of the opportunities or just switch as and when you need to do that. So that's what we're going to try and crack through today. We've got lot to get through. Andy, I wanted to bring you in, if I can, and kick off with a question about happiness. Now, you reminded me that when we first met a few years ago now, that I had you pinned as the anti-happiness guy. I'm sure
yes,
that's what
the Happiness Festival, in which my job was to challenge the whole construct of the event. Which
exactly, just you on your own.
Yeah, just me against everyone else.
So having you with that background, I just wondered, given the, I wonder what you would say about, given that everything that's going on, some people I think find the idea that it might be possible to find moments of happiness a bit of a ridiculous idea right now. I just wondered if you had anything to challenge me on about that.
Yeah, it's the idea of happiness as a ridiculous dream. It shows kind of where we're at the moment. It's like it's been feeling like a long road the last few months, and I mean, I suppose part of the thing that it's interesting thinking back to that happiness conference, because it was one of those moments where you start to see how things land with people. And the idea of happiness as a concept and promoting that always feels like it's just a general de facto good thing. But actually, having kind of been a bit provocative and challenging on the opening panel, I had a lot of people coming up to me later during the day saying thank you for making us feel like we're allowed not to be happy here, and that it's okay to feel a bit like I don't know what I want or don't know what I'm doing, because it can feel a bit like there's a sort of pressure to be happy. And so I think when we talk about happiness, we need to think of it as something that's quite different for different people. What it's a bit, I use the analogy of being at home a lot. Some people talk about happiness meaning just feeling chirpy, positive, optimistic. Other people talk about it as having meaning, feeling that the things that they do matter. And so it's like, if things are tough, that doesn't preclude the possibility of feeling things are going in the right direction, things that, feeling that you're doing good things, that you're glad with how you're spending your time. So a lot of it actually probably ends up feeling more like well-being anyway. This idea that it's more about whether you're feeling comfortable in your mind, whether you feel like your life's moving in the right direction. And so there may be many elements of it. It may be that some aspects of life are not going well, but other aspects you feel like, at least I know what I want, at least I feel like I've got good relationships, whatever it might be. So a lot of it ends up being about where you put your attention. And one of the most interesting things I've found about happiness is the idea that Daniel Kahneman proposed. When Kahneman's work, if you've read his book Thinking Fast and Slow or know much about him, he won a Nobel Prize for his work on prospect theory, and most of his work is about decision making under risk and uncertainty and how we assess options. But I think one of the most interesting things he said was in his Nobel Prize speech, and he said that he thinks that the way intuition works is like visual search. So he thinks it evolved from the same systems. So in the same way that you scan a room or scan a scenario, or if you're looking at a Zoom call, you see lots of things that are all the same, and one thing that's moving, your attention is called there. And he thinks that's the way that we assess how things are going in our lives, that we notice the things that are changing and we ignore the things that stay the same. And so often the reason that we end up feeling unhappy is because we're noticing the things we've lost, the things that we wish we had, but we kind of ignore the backdrop of that, which is of family or friends or, walking the dog or things like that. So a lot of happiness research has been about trying to help people to notice all these maintained states, these things that are actually there all the way through. As well as noticing, I wish I had this, or I wish that hadn't happened. But it's about seeing the whole picture. And if you see the whole picture, at least you have a sense of, there's three things that I'm really angry about at the moment. But then there's also, walking the dog or seeing my mum or whatever it might be. So it's about that balance and attention, I think, that's the key.
So is there anything that we should be doing, sort of, this idea that happiness is not a state that you achieve one time, but it's about little moments across the day. Is there anything that we could be doing to help us, particularly at this point when we're all a bit, oh God, this is just old, we're just done with this. Is there anything that we can do to help develop a more sort of positive mindset on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, we talked a bit in previous sessions about well-being actions and the things that we do day to day. I'm always I'm happy with people to be grumpy. It's all right. We don't. If you're feeling like you're not very positive at the moment, that's all right. It's nothing. There's nothing wrong with negative emotions. They call attention to things that you want to change or sort out. It's and a lot of it is just about trying to figure out what actually makes us happy day to day, rather than fixating on the future or big things, because often the things that actually bring us happiness are the smaller things. And so we're quite bad actually at predicting what will make us happy. One of the famous studies on it was of people in Ohio and people in California. And the people in California and people in Ohio both think that people in California are happier. But actually, when you measure their happiness levels, they're about the same. And so a lot of this ends up being that we think, if once I've got this, then I'll feel happy. Once I've got that, then I'll feel happy. And actually, if you think what has brought me joy over the last few years, it's often not the big achievements. It's the moments with people or doing something that you're passionate about. Or, in the creative world, I think a lot of it is about feeling like you've got something of yourself out into the world, and you can feel like, yes, that represents something of me, rather than sort of, you might be celebrating if you get some funding at the moment, but it's not necessarily that you look back on your life and think, I won a lot of funding bids. It's just a means to be able to do more of the things that bring you joy or think are important. Not that winning funding bids is to be sniffed at. I mean, we're all desperately trying to get more of that at the moment, but it's not. It's focusing on the what you're going to do with that freedom and opportunity, rather than just the kind of what else do I need to get that freedom and opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's interesting. One of the things that we've been doing over the last few sessions is trying to get people to sort of interact a little bit, and I'm thinking that it would be really interesting to hear from other people. I know people are at different points now. Some people are not at all motivated. Some people actually feel like they're having, they found that kind of those moments of happiness. It'd be really interesting if people could share in the chat either a change, the one change that you think you could make to your day or your week that would markedly increase your happiness, or maybe if you've got tips for things that you've already done that have made you feel a lot happier. I know there's one person on the call who said to me last week, I've started going swimming loads, wild swimming, and that had markedly increased his happiness. So I don't know, it'd be great to just get some inspiration from the chat. What we like to do on these talks is kind of collect these all together and then send them back out to people so that so that you can all share people's ideas, maybe get inspired. So it'd be great to see some of those coming up in the chat.
Dancing is immediately popular.
Yeah,
and it has been, just as a sort of context for this, it's been one of the things that's been happening is a lot of the people I speak to are going, I'm noticing what's important, actually spending more time with my kids or spending more time at home, or getting more time in nature. So it is a sort of a big reboot where we do get to start thinking, actually, maybe I have been pointing myself at some of the wrong things, and actually what I really need is these things, and then everything else can be a bit uncertain.
Yeah, I think there's something that we might be worth us latching onto in the final talk about how, once you've done that, how do you retain that? Because in the next session, we're going to be talking about innovation, and innovation, of course, isn't just having the idea; it's seeing it through and making that change and making the change happen. So that might be something for us to think about.
Making it stick.
Making it sticky. Yeah.
I mean, prioritizing sleep, listening to music, going on a run. There's lots of great stuff here. So this is fantastic. And a lot of this is about habits. You build up the good habits, and then when things change again, you'll stick with them. But it's been strange looking at how easy it has been to just change everybody's routine. It shows how flexible we actually are, that we can, if we put our minds to it, change a great deal about how we live. It's just that it feels in the moment like that would be impossible, but it's a good proof that we can change when we want to.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the challenges at the moment is that I think I did say earlier that I think it's getting a little bit old. I've definitely felt a sort of a change in the last few weeks with the people that I've been talking with, and I'm running lots of action learning sets with people at the moment and talking to lots of freelancers. And it definitely feels like there's been a change in the last few weeks. And I think at the beginning, a friend of mine, she was talking about the importance of having sort of team now and team next. And back in March, we're like, we're going to furlough some people. And then when they come back, they'll be really fresh and we're going to take it in turns and all this sort of thing. And I think the reality is that for a lot of people, whatever you've been doing since March, you've just been doing that. So if you've been furloughed, your cutlery drawer is as clean as it's ever going to be. You've thought about all of this stuff. You've probably got too much time, and you've had a lot of that. If you've been working, the chances are you might have been working at a crazy pace or just dealing with uncertainty or having to pivot your business. And whatever you've been doing, you're kind of done with it. You just want some certainty. And it's hard to motivate yourself, I think, when you're tired or when you're just, when you're feeling the opposite of unmotivated. So I think the big challenge is to kind of pick yourself back up again and almost like start again and keep going. What can we do to sort of motivate ourselves right now when our energy levels are down and it all feels a bit pointless for some people?
Yeah, it's definitely the kind of the point we've hit in the cycle, and I'm speaking just to loads of people who are just really tired, including me. We've all been like it at Mind Apples. We went very fast at the start, going like, we need to help people, let's go and do stuff. And then you kind of the energy, the nervous energy, and the panic can only sustain you for so long before you start just thinking, I just really want to sleep and I don't want to speak to anybody anymore. And So that kind of motivation is the key to it. What I've also found really interesting in all of this lockdown is that it's nicely summed up by a friend of mine who said to me that she's always told herself that the reason she hasn't done loads of things is because she didn't have time. And then she's had loads of time and she hasn't done any of those things. And she's realized it's just because she doesn't want to do those things. And she's using this time thing as an excuse. And so it's partly just showing us how we motivate ourselves and what we're motivated by. Because if we don't have the constant cycle of, I need to do this for this person, or I need to go there, or I need to do that, or then it's a comfort zone of thinking, well, I've promised this to people, I've got to keep doing it. And we don't have to stop and go, do I want to do any of this? If I wasn't under pressure right now, would I even care about this? And what would I care about instead? What would I be spending my time on? And we do a lot of stuff on motivation. We've been trying to sort of support people with trying to at least understand what motivation means and how we frame it. So I can give a bit of a setup for the conversation today, I suppose, is that one thing to bear in mind is that motivation is about eagerness to act. It's about the excitement you feel for things. So it shouldn't be a struggle. It's not the same as willpower. If you're finding that you have to force yourself to write a grant funding application, then that's not motivating you. It's the things that you find you're doing instead, or the things that you wish you had more time to spend on those, because that's actually what you would do if left unattended. You'd go and do that. These are the things that are where that motivation lies. And the other thing about it is it doesn't just come from external incentives or even just from inner drive. It comes from a combination of things. And so the model that we use, and I think we shared the tip sheet, which we can send out afterwards as well, is that there's kind of three ingredients to being motivated. You need some kind of external incentive, something in the world around you that pulls you into action, whether that's needing stuff or wanting stuff, whether it's trying to avoid fines or get money or an opportunity to do something, or deadlines, but then you also need some kind of inner drive, some personal connection to it that makes it feel like your sort of thing, because there's loads of things that need doing, but most of them we'd be happy if someone else would sort it out. And then there's some things you think, oh, I don't want you to do it. I want that one. That's a great thing. That's my sort of thing. I want to do that bit. And then the third bit, which ties in a bit to some of the things we talked about previously, is that you also need to feel able to succeed, because otherwise it feels incredibly stressful to care about something and have incentives but not have the capacity to deliver it. It's a very stressful place. So often the reason that people end up demoralized or demotivated is actually because they don't have the capacity, the resources to deliver on this thing that they care about. And so you see this a lot in big organizations or places like NHS, social care, where you can tell people have gone into the role because they care, but then they haven't been the resources and they haven't been able to do the support that they want to give to people. And so they get to the point where they just numb out and just go, you know what, it's more than my job's worth, just whatever, don't care anymore. And so I think that idea of trying to find that combination of things that the world is offering you a chance to do or asking you to do, and things that you actually want to spend your time doing, and things that you can do yourself. That sweet spot is where you find the motivation. And if you don't have the motivation, it's usually because one of those is missing. Either there's no deadline, or you don't really care about it, or you don't even know where to start with it. That will be the thing that kills our motivation. So tiredness can be, if you're not sleeping, if you're exhausted, you just have less capacity for it. A lot of the time, the reason we're demotivated at the moment is just because we're so tired. And actually, if we could get a proper rest, proper break, we'll come back to it and go, oh, actually, you know what? I feel I'm up for this now. I can do it now. It's not the task that's changed. It's that your mind is now fresher and you're able to do it. So yeah, lots of angles just to explore with motivation.
I mean, I think that's interesting. Isn't it? It's making me think that a really useful thing for people to do afterwards, and maybe to think about that equation. And like you say, we can send out the tip sheet, because there's that really lovely Venn diagram that you've got in there that is really helpful. And just look at what is missing, because if like you say, it's the chance it's in one of those circles or maybe two of those circles, and then once you've clocked that, you can start to think about what can you do to change that, and hopefully that would have an impact on your motivation levels.
Yeah, and particularly you have to do different things depending on what's missing. So a lot of the general tips on how to get motivated, it may be that what you're doing is doubling down on something that you're fine about and missing something else. So you spend lots of time goal setting, and when actually what you need is a good night's sleep, it's not going to help. You've got to get the right diagnosis.
So that's about really interrogating what's going on. Otherwise you're not interrupting your normal patterns of behavior, presumably. And
I think a lot of the time we end up thinking, if I just set goals and push myself, then I will feel motivated. But actually, it may be that something else is missing, and so just spending a bit of time interrogating what would need to be in place for you to feel like this feels exciting or achievable.
Yeah.
Is sometimes it is we need a bit more money. Sometimes it is you need someone who can help you. Sometimes it's that actually what you need is to feel like you can see something of yourself in this task, because otherwise it just feels generic. Sometimes what you need is someone to give you a deadline and say, do it by the end of the week, and so it's lots of different things might be the thing that gets you suddenly feeling like, okay, yeah, time to do this now. Right.
Yeah. And I've just seen a lovely comment in the chat about the idea of taking yourself on as a client. It's some of the things I've been talking to other people about is like almost trying to find an accountability buddy who can actually help you with that. Because sometimes, you can take yourself on as a client, but chances are you're going to be quite slack about the deadlines, or so having I think an accountability buddy is quite an interesting thing to think about in terms of this as well.
I did hear a great example of this from someone. Told me that they'd been working on their master's thesis, and they just arranged 5 o'clock on a Friday. He and another person on his master's course would meet up in the pub. Remember those? They were a thing, and they would compare word count each week, and whoever had written the fewest number of words had to buy all the drinks, and so they both finished early.
I love that idea. That's brilliant. One of the things that I think is quite interesting is or certainly I'm seeing a lot, is that people are thinking about, if I can't do what I normally do, then I might think about doing something else instead. I'm hearing that quite a lot from people who are just either in the short term, they've done a sort of like, short term sort of pivot, or they're actually thinking, I don't know that my industry is going to look the same as it did before when it comes back, if it comes back. And actually this has caused me to kind of, I've had a lot of time to think, and it's making me think that I might want to do something different. And I think that for some people that feels really positive, and for other people it feels really negative. But there's something about, I always think of this as like a blank sheet of paper thinking. So you've got this blank sheet of paper and you could write anything down about what you might do. We've talked a lot about values, but I think sometimes you can say, oh, well, I know what my values are, but without sort of really, really interrogating them. And so one of the things that I've been encouraging people to do is to, I don't know if you've ever done it, it's kind of like timeline of your life. And you do, it's useful to think about key moments in your life, whether at school or at work or like first job, or, but also key people and key influences. It's quite interesting when you think about the people who have influenced you over the time, who in one way or another could be good, could be bad, and any of the sort of challenges that you face. And you end up with this really lovely sort of picture of your life. And you can make it, if you're someone like Sarah who's doing the graphic illustration, it would look amazing. If you're someone like me, it's lots of stick people and, crazy drawings and things like that. But it's a really interesting thing to do. You put in moments that you're proud of. And actually this storytelling approach creates a really kind of rich sense of what's important to you, and it can be quite interesting because it you can spot at different times in your life that different things were important. I think one of the things that's been most interesting for me to think about over sort of the last 10 years is that the values that I maybe had when I started the company are really different to the values that I have now. And I think originally I would maybe think about my personal values as being slightly separate to my company values, and now I've realised that they all need to mesh together. But I don't know if there's anything else that you would want to add about values, because I think they can be hidden in plain sight sometimes.
It's one of those things where I think I've probably got better at seeing my values when I've looked at what I've been doing rather than when I've sat down and tried to plan it. So, a really interesting exercise that I did years ago was just basically you step forward 7 years each time and talk about what's the last 7 years have been like. And so you go up to where you're at now, and then you keep going. And you say, what's the next 7 years like, and so you can kind of plan out what are going to be the memorable moments that you would imagine looking back on, rather than just getting lost in the day-to-day of it. But it's a couple of simple questions to ask around values is, how do you spend your money and how do you spend your time? Because it's just, you find that you in the abstract you care about these things, but actually what you spend your time is on other things, and it may not be the things that you necessarily think. And what we did with Mind Apples, we kind of just did things, and then we worked back and tried to figure out what principles we were following. and they felt more true because they were actually reflective of what we were doing rather than a kind of an aspiration of what we would like to do. And a lot of company value statements, I'm sort of slightly obsessed with company value statements because they so rarely seem to reflect anything controversial or decisive or interesting. They tend to be words that everybody would aspire to have, and so you end up with words written on the wall like being trustworthy, and you can't imagine a company saying what I would like the company to be is untrustworthy or dishonest. I want to build an unprofessional company. Just these are unless there is a meaningful opposite to it, it's not really a useful term to apply. So you could, for example, say that you want to build products that are high quality, but it might be perfectly valid to say I want to build low quality products because it might be that you're making something that's for a cheap market, and that's a viable thing to do. It's more about trying to figure out what choices are you making with that, and so actually looking back and thinking, what choices have I made? What have I made important? What didn't I do? What did I do instead of doing that? Oh, I did this instead. Those are the things that show you your values, and the more you can get clear on those and understand them, the more you can start to then feed that back in and say, I'll do more of these things that uphold my values. And so it's a funny thing though, all this value stuff. A lot of this is, I think, it's really important right now. I know we're going to talk in a bit about business planning, and so it would certainly be good to talk a bit more about that. But one of the things that is interesting about this motivation model is that you've got external incentives, things that the world is asking you to do or demanding of you, and those change with the world. You've got your resources, the things that you're able to do, which is somewhat more in your control, but still you can have things taken away. You can have people let you down, and the rest of it. The bit that doesn't change is the bits that you care about, the things that you value. And so they become quite a useful anchor in uncertain times, that this sense of purpose helps you pivot. You know what you want, you know what you believe in. The world changes around you, but at least you've got that anchor, which means you kind of, good things when you see it, where you want to go. So that's why it becomes important right now, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting, Louise, to just put something in there about, the difference between sort of aspirational values and working values. And I just wanted to mention, we at the Hub, we talk about knees a lot. So knees as in kneecaps, that's how it's spelled, KNEES. And what you were talking about, the choices that you make reflecting the values that you have. I would say that the values of the Hub are around sort of curiosity, generosity, and anger. Probably those three things, really. And a desire to sort of make a difference because of that. So when we're choosing projects to take forward, whether that's a client project or something that we're developing ourselves, we will ask ourselves, is it needs? And that stands for, the K is for knowledge. Will it develop knowledge in some way? The N is for new. Is there an element of the new about it? The first E is, does it excite us? Because we're going to be spending time and we want to be excited. Is it enabling in some way? Does it enable something good to happen? And can we share what we learn? And if a project doesn't hit all five of those things, then it's not right for us. And we literally in meetings will go, well, is it knees? And if we're having a particularly cheesy day, we'll say, if it's not knees, there hasn't got legs.
That's very
particularly
nice.
Cheesy. And it took me about 10 years to notice there wasn't a money one in there, which tells you a lot about the way
I've just seen that, there's a comment in the chat about that. The profit is obviously one of the key things in law. That's what private companies have to work towards, is profit for shareholders, and yet it's often not in the value statements. But it's a good way of putting it. Is the kind of the needs thing is quite a good illustration of how these should be used. Is that it should be a decision-making tool for deciding what you say no to.
Yeah.
And so I can see Claire. Don't worry, I'm not going to judge your values, Claire. It's fine. But things like if diversity is a value, then it would mean you say no to things that are not sufficiently diverse. If quality is a value, then you would say no, we can't do that well enough. We're going to have to pass on that because we can't give it the quality that it deserves. So as long as they're helping to guide your prioritizations, then they're useful. The problems come when I think you've got things where they're not really being used for decision making making them more just sort of aspirational statements. And I was reading an article this morning about data ethics and AI. Data ethics, of course, somewhat an important topic this week. But there was a Dutch woman who spoke at Silicon Valley, read out a whole load of amazing value statements about how we were going to be ethical about AI, and then revealed that it was written by the Chinese government. And all these amazing aspirations are just words, and they're clearly not actually putting them into practice at all. Oh yeah, we want to tell us the knees thing again, Julie.
Oh yeah, the knees. So, well, actually, I've got two sets of knees now. Interestingly, so the one that I just mentioned is knowledge. K is knowledge. N is new. E. The first E is exciting. The second E is enabling, and the final S is sharing. And a few years ago, I realized that what I should probably do is try and have a personal set of knees as well. Like, that sounds really ridiculous when I say it out loud.
You'd have your own knees.
My own knees. So that was, it sort of talks to what I was mentioning before about lining up your sort of business and your personal values. And I was quite late to the game in terms of figuring that out. And so I developed it was when I was on sabbatical, and I thought I need to come back and work in a way that honours my own values. So the second set of needs was around kindness. This is terrible, I can't remember what they were. Nurturing, exciting was in there, enough, and sustaining. And so, but they're not as hardwired into my brain as the first one. But that idea of having a personal set of values that can guide your personal choices that you make about your work, and how much you do it, and how you do it, and all those sorts of things. I found was important as well.
And a lot of it just has to be memorable. If you don't remember it, it's not going to be there as a present thing to guide you. So a lot of the time we write stuff down, but then if you ask people, what are your values? You go, I don't know, I'll have to look them up. And that means they're not really guiding your decision making. But I mean, I ended up with all these different value statements and things that we were talking about. I ended up just back at a very simple thing, which was that I wanted to enjoy my life and help other people do the same. Which actually does guide huge amounts of my decision making. I do a lot of things because I think I might enjoy them, and enjoyment can mean I might learn, I might feel like I'm going to meet some interesting people. But a lot of my work is actually driven by thinking this would be enjoyable for us, it would be enjoyable for people who are participating in it, and it's become quite a nice, helpful guide. If it's not enjoyable, then there has to be a really good reason to do it.
Yeah. What's the what would you say is the one thing you'd want people to sort of do as a sort of, it's 11:15, they're thinking, I'm just going to do some follow-up to this amazing session from Andy. What would the thing that you want them to do be in terms of motivation?
In terms of motivation, I mean, there's different angles that we might take, because I think we'll talk a bit about market fit and business planning as we go through. But in terms of the values piece, I would encourage everyone to look at what you've said no to over the last 2 or 3 years, and why. Why did you say no to those things, these opportunities, these things that you could do? This is the coulds from the shoulds. There's loads of coulds. Quite a few of them you didn't even consider bothering to do, and that, I think, reveals a lot about where your priorities are at. If you just immediately go, no, not doing that, looking back and reflecting on the things that you've turned down, I think is a really useful thing to do, to understand what you're trying to get more of and what you want less of.
Yeah. And asking people to think about what's important right now, I guess, because it's such a specific sort of time, and what goals they might have. Sorry, room's falling apart there.
There you go. They're all falling apart.
They're all falling apart.
Yeah, I mean, and we should probably talk more about the kind of, trying to plan in a concept of uncertainty, because I think some of it at the moment is about trying to identify what you wish you had. So I think some of the things we often talk about is trying to think, if you could wave a magic wand, what would happen, what would change, what would you have in place, because that can often tell you a bit about it. It may be that if you had a magic wand, you might wave that, and what you would give yourself is money to sustain an organization, project budget to do more of your work. Or it may be that if you waved a magic wand, you'd wave it and you'd say, I don't need to keep putting in funding applications anymore. Like it sort of tells you a bit about, if you just think from a position of, what would I do in a perfect world if I had everything I need? That helps then to think, okay, well, I can't do all of that yet. What's my path to getting there? So, for example, what would you do if you suddenly won the lottery? would you carry on working? For a lot of people, the answer would be no. But for a lot of people, it would be yes. A lot of people. One of the things I sometimes ask in companies is if the company suddenly had a cash flow crisis and couldn't pay anybody, how many of you would come to work? And if I'm speaking to Save the Children, the answer is almost everybody, because they want to save children and they'll find a way to try and keep going because they care about the people. If you work in a hedge fund, maybe you wouldn't bother because you're there to make the money. So it tells you a bit about, if you wave a magic wand, what would you have? But I do want to ask you a bit about the business planning, because we talked a bit about this, about how do we plan in a context of uncertainty and and sort of putting together a plan that is realistic, I suppose, because we can talk a bit, and from my side, I guess I'm interested in helping people to figure out what they care about and what they'd like to do, what their passions are. But there's a sort of hard edge to it of like, what do we do to turn that into a viable project or business?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I think it's so interesting that the sort of planning and uncertainty now. I think it can feel quite paralyzing. I think that's why the value stuff is so important, because I think you have to start with what's really important to you, because it's tough thinking about all of this sort of stuff now. So like we were talking about, you have to be motivated. It has to feel important to you. I'd absolutely get shot down by most business planning coaches. I do a fair amount of sort of business planning training with people, and I tend to call it business guessing, which probably gives you an idea of sort of my approach to sort of getting people inside it. I think the starting point for me around business planning is that you're actually planning for you, not somebody else. And a lot of people think, oh, I've got to do a business plan because a funder requires it, or the bank's going to need it, or whatever. But actually, the purpose of having a business plan is to help you invent the future that you want. So when I do business planning, I don't call it business planning, I call it inventing the future or designing the future. And that immediately gives it it gives it a different feel for me. I think that if you're trying to do that sort of thing, the key thing is just debunking the jargon. Most of it is informed guesswork. It's not a dark art. A lot of it is kind of common sense and a bit of imagination. So that, in terms of a starting point, I think that's where I would say. The other thing I would say is that it's really hard a plan's a bit like a map, but you can't have a map unless you know where you're starting from. So really having a clear sense of whether it's starting from in the sense of values or starting from in terms of what you have, the skills you have, the resources you have, that's what makes it sort of realistic. I suppose the other thing that I would say is that, and again, this is probably sacrilegious to most people, I think the planning is more important than having a plan. I don't know if that makes sense. So the thinking and doing the messy stuff, I think that's where the value is. I don't care really whether people write it up into a really nice looking document. You obviously need to do that if you're trying to get money out of somebody, but actually you're doing it so that you're clearer. And so if you're a visual thinker, and the best way for you to do it is to put loads of notes all over your wall and just take a picture of them or just stare at your wall, then I think that makes perfect sense.
It's interesting. I think the idea of writing these things up is often seen as synonymous with the business planning. That's what business plans are. They're written things, and you're right. It's not necessarily the most important bit. And I've sort of ended up thinking that we write documents for two purposes: for clarifying and conjuring. The clarifying is we write it because we're trying to figure out what it is, and we want to get clear between us. And so once we've all got it, were we happy with that? Yeah, that's where we're at right now. And you can almost just throw that away. And then the conjuring is, I want this thing that's in my head to become real in the world. So I write it in a way that makes people feel like it's real. So funding bids, business plans, sometimes value statements, mission statements. The purpose of it is to instantiate or give life to something. Yeah. And often we end up mixing the two up, and we write things as if they're for an external audience when really we're just trying to get clear what we're talking about, or we write something that's for that's something that should be written externally, and we're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I don't really care what it looks like. I think the other thing that I find quite useful is people find a sort of storytelling approach much better. So, almost like breaking down your years and going, so in fact, I did this last year. I went away in the summer. The other thing I tend to do is I take myself off for like a week, and I would do some really detailed business planning, and I try and go somewhere nice. It doesn't have to be anywhere expensive. Quite often sit on the beach and do my business planning, because I find staring at the sea really helps me think in a different way. So that would be my other tip, go somewhere that is creative, that you find creative, that helps you. But I think that the storytelling approach that I was talking about, it can be just, 2019-20 is the year of ... This is what we're going to focus on. You don't even have to express it in bullet points and business planning language. I just think tell yourself the story of what you want that year to look like, a bit like you were saying. A really good exercise that I would suggest people do if they're thinking about business planning and thinking about inventing the future is to write themselves a postcard for the future. Anyone that's been on any of my sessions will probably have done this at least once or twice. So you just pick a point in the future, 3 years, 5 years, something like that, and you literally send yourself a postcard. You can write it, you can draw it, you can do the picture on the front to add to the story. And that postcard just has things on there about things that have happened. It might be where you are. It might be how proud you are to have weathered a particular challenge. And the thing is to just not censor yourself and just kind of free write it. And often it can be so surprising what ends up on your postcard. Doing that regularly every year or so is a really good way to check in on where you want to get to.
Yeah, some of this is about trying to capture enough so that you can look back on it as well. Because I think one thing very few people do is look back on old business plans. And I did that a bit with MindUp as I looked at things we'd written in 2011, 2013, usually in relation to funding bids or social enterprise stuff. That was the main reason we wrote documents, is because people like Unlimited told us to. But it's interesting to look at what stayed the same. I even have a copy of our website from 2008 to see which phrases I'm still using now, because those things then reflect things that are perennial parts of what we do, and other things have just dropped away because clearly we were just saying them because we thought it was what people needed to hear at that point.
I've just noticed a couple of people talking about drawing business plans and being visual learners. There's a book that I would definitely recommend to you. It's called The Right Hand Business Brain, something like that, by Jennifer Lee. It's really good. I will send a link to it in the email. It's a fantastic book. It has really visual exercises for people to do, lots of collaging and all that sort of stuff. So if you're struggling with that, it's a really good one.
A lot of this, it should be fairly simple. It doesn't have to be lots and lots of words. Even if you are writing it, it doesn't have to be long. And the one thing I would say is partly relates to what we're going to talk about in a bit about market fit. But I had a really simple formulation for a business plan for a commercial proposition or for social enterprise is simply because I have X. I can do Y, which means you get Z. And so it starts from, because for MindApples, it would be because we have years of research and experience explaining how the mind works, we can give you insights that will make sense of how you work and what you need to do to manage yourself. And because of that, you will be able to work more effectively or manage your well-being. And so it's sort of, it doesn't, even that one sentence, it's hard to get to, but if you get to that, that's maybe all you need to help explain your business to someone else or why someone might buy something.
I would like to try something if that's okay. I know we're a little bit tight on time.
This is a safe space.
I'm going to want to. So when I do business planning, one of the things that I get people to do is we do a little board game, which is all based around. It's basically, so my big thing about business planning is that lots of people make it feel like a dark art, and I think that it's just asking yourself smart questions. And I can tell from what's going on in the chat, we've got lots of people who've got experience of business planning and really nice tips on how to do it. So I'm going to give something a go that I would normally do in a training session. I'm going to try and see if we can crowdsource a list of really good business planning questions between us. And I'm going to do that by asking people to think about open questions. So questions that start with either who, what, why, where, when, or how. So this is where it might get a bit messy. So in the chat, if your birthday is in January or February, it would be brilliant if you could share some who questions over the next 2 minutes. So like, who are my target customers, those sorts of things that you think you might need to ask yourself to write a business plan. If you're born in March or April, if you could chuck some what questions that start with what in the chat. If you're born in May or June, some where questions that might be relevant to business planning. July and August, when questions. September and October, how questions. And November and December, why questions. So January, February, who. March, April, what. May, June, where. July, August, when. September, October, how. November, December, why. I don't know if this will work. It might break chat. Becky's got us off and going there. Where do we want to focus our efforts and resources? What am I selling? Yeah. How do you want to feel? You're my partner.
That's a nice one.
Yeah. And what's brilliant about doing this, normally in a training session, I would get everybody to do them, and I will do this. I'll share them with everyone. But if you give somebody, or if you take yourself off, you can do this. What I normally do is give people a dice, and if you roll a 1, you have to do a why question. If you roll a 2, a what question, that sort of thing. And if you sit with a dice for like 20 minutes after this session and roll the dice, I guarantee you will have all the questions that you need to ask yourself for a business, because that's all it is. It's asking yourself, important questions, really, and finding the answers.
It's something I described of process of trying to raise money and, talk to venture capitalists, things like that many years ago, is that one of the things that defines venture capitalists is they're people who ask really good questions. And so actually just the process of pitching your project to people, you get these amazing questions back and you think, I hadn't thought about that, and so questions like, where is the best environment for this idea to flourish? And you think, I hadn't even thought about that. Is it where I happen to be, or is it somewhere else in the world? Just these little angles on it. So these are great. These are fantastic. I want a copy of these. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. Andy, anything else? I know we were talking about making smart decisions. So, and when I talk about making smart decisions in a business planning context, I will talk about coulds and shoulds. So I will say there are loads of things you could do, but the important thing is that you narrow it down to the things that you decide you should do for whatever reason, because you've got some criteria or something like that. And the analogy that I use is like, you could go into a shop and there are loads of things that you could take into the changing room and you try them all on, and then you discard the ones that aren't right for you. So somehow for me, strategy is a bit like trying on a shirt and going, no, that's not for me, and then trying on another one and realizing that is for you. Anything you want to say about how, some tips on how you make smart decisions?
Yeah, maybe something we'll talk more about in the next part, because in the final part we're talking a bit about creativity, and we can talk more about in the mind, I suppose. I think a lot of the decision making is a combination of analytic and intuitive intelligence. So a lot of, I think, what's going on with business planning, and we're trying to find things that motivate you, is it's the back and forth of analysis and then sense checking it and sort of thinking, how do I feel about this? And sometimes there will be a good analytic reason why you should do something, but you feel like you have no energy for it. And that's pointing at some kind of misfit about either you don't feel you can do it well, or you don't feel you want to, or something like that. But a lot of this is about trying to look around at all the different things that other people think you should do, and trying to evaluate how they sit with you and what you have energy for. So a lot of the time what I end up doing is trying to think, what do we have energy for at the moment? What do we seem to be talking about more? Where are we going in that direction? You've got to slightly check it, because sometimes the reason you're putting something off is because you feel like you're not very confident about it. And actually, sometimes what you need to do is to get a bit of support or push yourself to try and take on something that's a bit of a stretch. So it can be easy to get stuck in a comfort zone. So it's not like, if you feel intuitively this is wrong, it's wrong. It's more just that both of these things are giving you good information, and listening to both sides, the analytic and the intuitive, gives you more information to make the choice about. The other thing I would say, though, is that when you're trying to make an intuitive judgment about something, try not to do anything else, because there was a very fun experiment where they discovered that if people are holding a cold drink, then they think that people are cold and unapproachable. If you're holding a warm drink, you think people are warm and kind. So you can often find your intuition gets messed up, and you got an intuitive feeling about something, but it's not about that. It's about something else completely. So it's that constant checking of like, I feel really bad about this. Like, I can't be bothered to do it. Why? What is it about this? Is it for good reasons or bad reasons that I have no energy for this, and I've got all this energy for this other thing?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, the other thing I suppose we want to talk about, we talk about criteria, about how you make good decisions. And you talked earlier about motivation, and how one of the things that can be about that is the lack of resources, like not having the wherewithal to achieve some of the things. So we talked a little bit about this last time, about kind of resourcefulness and resilience and thinking about what you have. Is there anything that we should be thinking about in terms of the outside world? We often talk in business planning about to move forward, look around. If you want to go ahead, make sure you kind of like horizon scanning, all that sort of thing. Anything that we should be thinking about there, do you think?
Well, actually, you can kind of bring the whole model together with when it comes to sort of thinking about business planning. If you start from the motivation model we talked about external incentives, inner drives, and ability to succeed, you can kind of put that into a business planning model where you're essentially what you're trying to figure out is what do other people want you to do, what do you want to do, and what can you do. And so what you can end up with is often you may discover that the thing that you're really passionate about and that the market wants is something that you can't do on your own. And at that point, you need to bring in somebody to help you. Or it may be that you think the thing I'm brilliant at, no one seems to care about, but I think it's really important. And what I need is to persuade people or create the market for people to see the value in what I'm doing. So a lot of this is about that back and forth of what do you have and what do other people need and what do you have energy for. It is a Venn diagram. It's essentially there's lots and lots of things that you might be able to say apply for funding for, and some of those things feel like things you could do well and others feel like I'm just chancing this to see if I can get away with it. And then one of those things might be something you think this I would be brilliant at, we could do that really well. And it's a sort of constant back and forth of those different things, and we're always pushing at the edges of it and thinking, well, I kind of don't want to do it this way, but I'll do it this way because that's what other people want. It's a compromise, but at least you can be conscious of the intersection of what can you do, what do you want, and what do other people need.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that that I really took to heart at back in March when I was thinking, what is it that I can do that would help right now? And once I'd kind of got that clear in my head, that really, really, like you were saying earlier, you had this kind of like, oh, we've got to help. Everybody went into overdrive, and it was that focus of thinking, what can I do? What do I know? What do I have that could be useful to people? And that really helped me focus on what I was going to do. So I think that is a really good one to think about that then.
And I think it's quite a good thing for the social sector as well, and for charities and for artists, is that it's a classic thing in the commercial world to talk about assets and what we own, but it's not necessarily as built into the social sector of thinking of what do we have. What are our asset base? What are our skills? What are the things that we have access to? And what does then that make it possible for us to do? And to think about building up our assets, building our skills, learning things, acquiring more options. That when you hit a crisis like this is the point where you look around and go, do I actually have anything? Do I just have an aspiration to help and no time and money? And I used to joke that social entrepreneurs are just like they give their time and money in support of good causes, but we have no time and we have no money. So we don't get much done. And so that's the goal: get more time, get more money, get more resources. Then you can put it to work on things that you're passionate about.
Yeah. Great, that's brilliant. It's 5:02. We've chatted for far longer than we were supposed to. Abby, would you mind jumping back in and just? I'm not sure if I've been trying to keep an eye on chat, but I don't know if there are any questions that have come in or.
No questions that I can see, just loads of really great business planning questions. But if there's one I've missed, because there's been so many that have come through, I don't think I have, but if anyone does have any questions, please ask them now.
In the chat.
There's also definitely a great one from Catherine. Why do I care? I think that's a superb one. And the one that I can add is on a what question is one of my favourite ones that one of our trainers came up with is, what if I didn't do it?
Yeah.
And because actually it makes you think, oh, maybe I could just cross this off my list. And then you think, oh, but I can't just not do it. It's probably because there's something that people need, there's something that you care about, there's something you can do. So these questions are fantastic for that. So
yeah. I was just thinking if anybody just wandered in and saw in the chat, where am I right now? Where do I want to get to?
It's very existential, So what have we done to everyone?
Exactly. That what if I didn't do it is a really good one. I think I mentioned last time the Andy Crabb book, the Busy book, and he has this thing about what can you unchoose? What can you choose not to do? What can you strip away? So I think that's a really good one.
Yeah, we talk about having a to-don't list about things we're definitely not going to do these at the moment, and it's quite helpful just to say, right, we have an aspiration to do a load of work in public health, for example, but it's really complicated and hard to do it, so we're not going to do that at the moment. We're focusing on schools, we're focusing on creative industries. Like putting stuff out of your mind is really helpful, I think.
Yeah. If anybody does have a question for us, do feel free to pop it into the chat, and we'll answer it if we can. But these are brilliant business planning questions. There's somebody's asked if you can get a copy of it. What we tend to do is we collate everything in the chat, and any book recommendations, any podcast mentions, anything that you think would be useful for people, pop them in the chat, and then we'll round them all up and we'll pop them into an email that we send to everybody along with the recording of the session. So we often get some really good book recommendations. One of the things that I'm thinking about doing in a bit after September is a little book club, because I just think we've been getting some really good recommendations, and I've wanted to do a little sort of business book club for a while. So if you fancy joining the book club, tell me in the chat and I'll let you know when I get around to it. We can come up with a reading list.
Yeah, there's some good suggestions here as well. So Nicola's suggesting the Strengths Finder. Essentially, the way to think of it is there's market analysis trying to figure out what the world wants from you, but then there's also the values work, figuring out what you're passionate about. And the bit also we need to do is, what are our strengths? What are we good at? What have we done well? And so those bits are all really important.
Actually, while you say that, somebody's just said, can I mention the name of the Busy book? It's Tony Crabb, Crabbe, and the book is just called Busy. But on the strengths thing, one of the things that you always get asked to do in business planning is the dreaded SWOT analysis. Everyone has done that, haven't they? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I think that's quite interesting. But if you think about it, it's like a photo. It's like a moment in time, and it can either leave you feeling great about yourself or like banging your head against the desk, because inevitably people always the list of weaknesses is always much longer than strengths. I've never found a group that come up with more strengths than weaknesses. And so one of the things that I do is I try and turn it around. So if you think SWOT is SWOT, if you turn it into TOWS, TOWS, and the challenge you set yourself there, it makes it a bit more dynamic, is how you can turn the opportunities and the weaknesses into strengths. So TOWS, turning the opportunities and the weaknesses into strengths. And suddenly it becomes a tool that is useful, rather than a thing that you can either just use to kind of pat yourself on the back about, or hit yourself, beat yourself up about.
I think I'm mostly interested in, I guess I call it SOP, is strengths, opportunities, passions. There's plenty of time to talk about problems and threats once you know what you want to do, but getting clear on, what are we good at, what are the opportunities around, and what do we actually have energy and love for, After there, you can go like what might derail this and what problems may come up, but start from the aspirations.
We are acronym central, aren't we?
I know, right? It's great. Well, there's a question about whether we have mentors. Actually, I can see. So thank you for that, Paul. And I guess I don't know. I have in the past, and I had a coach who was very senior in a media company who really helped me with thinking through business planning things. There's various people I go to for advice, but it's one of the reasons I've had an advisory board of Mind Apples for years. It's just to try and identify people who I think know things that we don't, and to be able to use them as a sounding board. But it's also what a good board of trustees does. So I think our board now at Mind Apples helps a lot with that, of just being able to be a sounding board and to help. But it's a good question. Do you have a mentor, Julia?
No, I'm the same as you. I did have one years ago, and actually it was interesting. I've had one both when I've just sort of been working on my own as a freelancer, and then also when we started the company, the three of us as directors all decided that we needed a personal mentor as well, to help us. This may be relevant to some people or not, but to help us in our dealings with the other directors, because we were all being directors for the first time, and sometimes you don't agree with each other. So it just gave us, and it was very non-hierarchical, so we were all equal. And it just gave me an opportunity to sort of road test some of my thinking with somebody who wasn't a peer, so that I could arrive at those meetings having thought that through. But I found it really, really useful. And it's Matt, my partner, will know that it's on my to-do list. I think it's interesting, the difference between a coach and a mentor. Sometimes for me, sometimes I need coaching. So I need just somebody to kind of open up my thinking. And I always think of those sort of coaching sessions as sort of like punctuation point. And sometimes I want a mentor who I can say, look, you've trodden the similar sort of path. Tell me what I should do. But, I think a combination of those is good.
Well, I remember speaking many years ago to my coach about, I was trying to do a hiring process for a startup, and just sort of trying to talk around it. And then there was a point where she just went, oh, look, okay, I've done so much of this. Let me just tell you how to do it. And we just stopped the coaching. At that point, she shifted really to being more of a mentor for me, because it felt like it would be easier. We had a good enough relationship that she could just shortcut some of that thinking and just help me to go, like, focus here. This is where you'll get more more drive, you know. So but
Yeah.
it's interesting. The idea of personal development as a route to professional development is something that's talked about more at leadership level, but it's really important for entrepreneurship. And I think I speak to so many social enterprises, including all of the ones I've started, where the company seems to be trying to solve something we feel stuck within ourselves. And so it's sort of, you know, if I want better well-being, I start a company that's about improving well-being, and eventually people will help me with my well-being. And if you know, I spoke to a woman who ran a startup that helped female entrepreneurs to scale their businesses, and she was having a lot of trouble scaling her business. And it feels like so much of it is the personal and the professional combined.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. You've rumbled why I wanted to do a series of talks around
yes.
balancing your mind.
Balance. How do we get balance, Julia?
Excellent. A final interaction, I guess, for today. I think it would be so interesting. We've covered quite a lot of ground, but I'd love to think that that this is going to unlock some kind of change. Abby, thank you for the questions. Thank you. It's brilliant. One final interaction that I guess I'd like to offer out to everybody is for you to think about, off the back of what you've heard today, what's the one thing that you feel like you can commit to today? What is the one thing that you think you might do differently, the shift that you might try and unlock? It would be so interesting just for Andy and I to just get a sense of what impact this is, or you know, what it's making you think about. It's difficult for us to know whether this sticks or anything, so I'd love to know that. If you're happy to share some of that in the chat, or if you wanted to do it afterwards, that's fine as well. But what's the one thing that you feel like you're going to commit to changing based on what we've covered?
Taking business plan less seriously. Great. Okay. At least we've undermined your confidence in a common tool.
it's true. I think everybody should take it less seriously and find a bit more joy in business planning. The last training thing I did was business planning for people who hate business planning. That's how we sold it. Paul's going to look at his knees.
Nice.
Brilliant. Making decisions.
Making decisions if you feel you have energy. That's sort of a factor to consider in it, is do you have energy for this, rather than it just all being cerebral. You know, it's decision making is emotional as well. Leap of faith in my values. Very good. Business
plan on a walk. Big fan of that. I definitely think doing a business plan anywhere that's nice is much better than doing it in a horrible little room.
I should also say one of the things that is underrated is not having a business plan, but having a business intention or a direction. So you may not know yet how you're going to get somewhere, but having a sense of we're going in that direction, and we'll start to see what emerges. And maybe that's as good as we can do right now.
Yeah, I think there's something about the agility, isn't there? The ability to respond. But I think the knees thing, we developed that because we could never remember our mission statement. You know, it was usually kind of like 2 or 3 sentences, blah, 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 blah. And then we thought, actually, we just need something that's really snappy. And it has stuck for like 15 years. And it's just, you know, I do think now we should probably have put a money related one in there. But, you know, we were social entrepreneurs. We didn't think about that.
No, who cares about money? We cracked that one. I mean, there is a story. I'm never sure quite if it's true, but the story goes that in any Coca-Cola board meeting, it is possible that whatever the board is talking about, any member of the board can stop the conversation and go, "Excuse me, but how does this help us sell more Coke?" And if the person speaking can't give an answer, then they have to stop that bit and move on to the next section of the board meeting.
Tough. There's some lovely things in here. Steve is enjoying your to-don't list, Andy. Timeline.
That's great. It's very relaxing.
Yeah, Elle is thinking about the third term in motor. I think that's because Elle's used the third term there because she's 39 weeks pregnant. I was going to ask you, Elle, if you'd had the baby. I wasn't quite sure when you arrived there. But yeah, do I have the resources? I think that's a really key one. I think if people can go away and think about all the resources that you have, and like we talked about last time, it's not just internal, is it? It's who else do you know? Who could help? You know, who could be your allies? Who could be your champions?
We don't need to do everything ourselves. Sometimes the bit that you have passion and skills for is one component of the thing that needs doing, and you need to find other people who share your values but have different skills.
Yeah. I'm just going up and down this list. It's moving so quickly. Yeah, and not doing this. Reevaluating my values. Yeah, I'm now in a position of entering a different work sector. I think that's a lot of people are saying that to me at the moment. You know, I'm thinking about switching careers wholesale. How do I decide if that's a good thing to do? and I think that's a combination of kind of long term and short term, isn't there? Some people are, making a short term shift, hoping that they will be able to return to this sector. And for other people, it's actually, there's a bigger thing going on here, and there's been a little niggle that I've been maybe ignoring for a while. And now's a chance that I've been able to take that niggle out and have a look at it and decide, look at it from different points of view and decide whether it's something that I should explore.
Yeah, that's a lot of us, I think, are looking at this as a chance for change, or being forced to change. But it is also, I see a few people talking about what they don't want to do anymore.
Yeah.
And one of the things that all of this situation has done is it's given us a bit more of space and strength and an excuse to say, I'm not doing that. Because it feels like a time where we're allowed to say, you know what, I've got so much going on, no. And that could be quite a helpful thing. You come back having only got the things in your life that you've decided to consciously say yes to. I mean, the other thing that I wonder about is that I've certainly been doing with people recently is buddying.
So, I've got a really good buddy who is in the same line of business as me, and we've been doing proper sort of buddying sessions with each other. Just to it's kind of like coaching, but it's more just like checking in. How are you doing? It's almost like a sort of sanity check. That's kind of what it feels like at the moment. Are we still sane?
That's very much why I'm doing these sessions with you, Julia. This is my monthly check-in.
For both of us. But, somebody was saying, most of the time, I'm mostly not mental. And that was the kind of benchmark that they'd kind of set themselves for now. But I think the buddying thing, I've certainly found it useful at other points in my life where I just get somebody to kind of check in with me once a fortnight or something, just to make sure that I'm not kind of getting too carried away with the latest brilliant idea that I've had that is going to change things for hundreds of people, So I think that can be useful.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with reality checking things. It doesn't. It can feel a bit like, it's defeat to just admit we can't do something. But actually, this is about being kinder to our future selves. That actually, if we do the check first and think, do I have the resources to do this? Will I be able to do this well? Is this something I have energy for? Then you end up taking on things that are actually things that you will find you can do sustainably, rather than that sort of pushing yourself into things where you think, actually, no, I don't know why I said yes to this.
There's a question here from Janice, not specifically for us, Andy, but how do you go about getting a mentor? She sees lots for junior or younger people, but what about for more experienced people? I mean, I just tend to ask. I mean, there are formal mentoring schemes out there, but as you say, a lot of those can be for junior people. What I've done in the past, I've thought about who do I really admire? Whose style do I like? Who would I like? Not who would I like to be, but it's about the cut of their jib, really, isn't it? For me, I think, and I just ask them, and normally they say yes. Because I think we work in a really generous sector in the creative sector, and I've certainly, when I've been, and sometimes I actually, I've done it the other way around. I've spotted somebody and I think, wow, I would love to help you if I can. And I've just said, look, if I can be at all of any help. So I actually volunteer I've sort of volunteered to mentor as well.
So. I think mentoring can feel like quite a big commitment sometimes, but I tend to think of it more as just people who I like, who know things I don't. And so that feeling of it being about trying to seek out people who share your values but know different things, have different experience. Sometimes that turns into a more formal mentoring thing, but it's just this general idea of talking to people who know things that you don't, who can ask you good questions. It's a nice thing to do. And Abby is plugging the Fed community members mentoring.
Yeah, Abby and I have been talking about the buddying thing. So and as you said, free membership. If you're not, I think probably a lot of you are already members, but if you're not, then please do that. That's probably a good point for us to start wrapping up, I think, and just to talk about what's coming next. So I will pull all of the really useful stuff from the chat and some of the recommendations, some of your book recommendations as well, Andy, and put those into an email that will go out to everyone, and we'll include a link to the recording for that as well. If when you get that you think, wow, I know some people who would find that really useful, obviously do forward it to them. We want this to benefit as many people as possible, so do share it with people that you think would find it useful. Sarah, I know Sarah's been busy scribbling away. Are you able to share your screen if you're here, Sarah? We'll just see. Sarah's been working on a graphic illustration. I was going to say brilliant. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure it will be. So I know some of you were visual.
I was going to say you haven't seen it yet. You can't say it's brilliant.
I know we've got some visual thinkers and learners.
I tell you what, today you two were the analogy kings and queens.
I didn't mention cake though. I'm sorry, I queued you up for cake.
Changing rooms. So the two things you told me you were going to include, nothing.
I think I did get my changing room analogy in.
Well, then I missed that one.
Never mind.
Not as graphic as previously because there were just so many acronyms.
If you need us,
it's okay. I'm quite pleased with my knee one. Knees with legs.
Very good. Very good. So we'll share that as well, just in case any of you will find the illustration more useful than the audio. So thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Couple of follow-up things then. So we do a drop-in session after each of the main sort of balance talks. And that's a chance for people either to sort of like revisit some of the things that we've talked about today, or actually people just pop along because they, fancy a bit of a chat with other people who care about this kind of stuff. So it's more often than not just a general supportive chat, and we sort of chat about what things are going on for us. And the next one of those is going to be next Wednesday on the 26th of August. We kick those off at 9:30 and they last about an hour and a quarter, generally about 15 or so people. So if you fancy coming along to that, do that. And then the next balance talk is on the 23rd of September. And we're going to be talking all about sort of creativity, innovation, and how you stay positive. So maybe taking some of the ideas that we've introduced today, taking those a little bit further. It would be brilliant if any of you do a postcard from the future. It would be great to see what those look like and to hear. It's really nice to share those with other people. So maybe the best way to do that would be to just tag me on Twitter. So I'm @CuriousJuliaP. And the hashtag that we're using for this series is HubBalance. So if you wanted to use either of those, or you can email them to me and I'll just include a link to them in the next newsletter that we do. It's really nice to see other people's postcards. It can often be really inspiring. So if anybody does do that, then do share those. That would be brilliant. We do, if any of you are struggling with things that we've not covered in these sessions and that maybe need a bit more sort of professional support, then on our website you will also find a link to some of the organisations that can help with that. Obviously if you're having a tough time, we want you to get the proper kind of support. And some thank yous. Andy, thank you as ever. Abby, thank you for doing the questions. I would like you, if you can, to just turn on your cameras while I also thank our funders, so South East Creatives and Colchester Borough Council. And Abby there appearing, thanks to the Fed as well for being such a brilliant partner on this. If everybody could switch on their cameras, those of you that are back, that would be amazing. And we're going to do our goodbye. Now, those of you who were here last time know that I totally managed to stuff up the goodbye moment. Those of you that are new, we normally try to do something a bit more exciting than just waving. So this time around, we thought that what we would try and get everybody to do as a sort of sign off is the British Sign Language sign for motivation. And Andy and I have been practicing this, and it's this kind of going up and down like this. So as a goodbye, it'd be really good to get a sense of how motivated you are. The more motivated you are now, the faster your hands go, and that will be our goodbye moment for everyone. So I'm feeling very motivated. That's brilliant. Great to see that. And you've learned a new bit of sign language as well. How amazing is that? So
the important thing is we're totally sane. It's fine. We're all fine.
Sane. So thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you hopefully next month. Take care, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Bye.